Okay guys, welcome back. So today is supposed to be a totally normal, boring homework day. Math test tomorrow, gotta study. Did you guys hear that? Did you guys hear that? Okay, that's weird. That is a weird sound. Hello? Mom? Is that you?
Okay, chat, I don't know what's going on in my house right now, Zanine, but we're gonna find out together. What? Who did this? Who did this? WHO did this! Did you see that? That thing was in my fridge. It was eating our cheese. This is bad. This is so bad. You were supposed to be doing homework. Why is there food everywhere? Why is the fridge not closed properly? Is that a bite mark on the apple?
Okay, and I know how this sounds, but there was something in the fridge, like a creature. It had big teeth and huge eyes, and it was just eating everything.
Nancy.
I'm serious, I have it on camera, look.
So you're telling me a creature broke into our fridge, made all of this mess, and just disappeared?
Phone. Now. Mom, what?
Clean this up. Clean this up. Then back to your room.
No! No!
How did you get in here?
I am being haunted by a snack-stealing little gremlin, and I cannot even post about it because my mom took my phone.
Give it back. Okay, guys. So that's my life now, apparently. Subscribe, because things are about to get very weird in this house.
I am being haunted by a snack-stealing little gremlin, and I cannot even post about it because my mom took my phone.
7 a.m. Birds, sunlight. And I was on the kitchen floor. There's something in this house. Something was in my room.
The woman before you, she died in that kitchen. She kept saying someone visited her at 3 a.m. We thought she was crazy.
She didn't die in fear. She died waiting. And she never stopped.
Don't go. Of me? You came back.
The state of Vermont is famous for its rolling green hills, its maple syrup, its covered bridges, and its peaceful countryside. But if you drive far enough down the back roads, past the last gas station, past the last flickering streetlight, you will find areas where the quiet is not peaceful at all. Areas where the quiet has teeth. This is the story of a young girl named Clara Whitfield and the house on Hollow Creek Road that refused to let go of its past. Clara was 19 years old when she inherited the old farmhouse from her grandmother. It was deep in the rural woods of Orleans County, Vermont. The house was at the very end of a gravel road that most people in the area refused to drive down after sundown. The house was beautiful, in a broken sort of way. The white paint was peeling like dry skin. There was a wide front porch that groaned under every footstep. The house was surrounded on all sides by pine trees so tall and so thick that even on a sunny afternoon, the house was in shadow. Clara had no money. She had no family left to speak of. She had nowhere else to go. So she packed 2 bags, drove her old rusty Subaru up from Burlington, and moved into the house on Hollow Creek Road alone. The first night was quiet. The second night was quiet. On the third night, it began. It began at precisely 2:17 in the morning. Clara was sleeping under 3 blankets, the Vermont autumn chill already beginning to seep through the old walls, when a noise dragged her abruptly out of her sleep. Laughter. Not warm laughter. Not the kind that belongs to a human throat. This was something greater, something wrong, like a child laughing underwater, like a music box playing just a hair too slow. It resonated through the hallway outside her bedroom door, bouncing off the wooden walls, filling the whole house. Clara sat bolt upright in her bed, her heart pounding in her chest. She tried to tell herself it was the wind. The Vermont wind could play tricks on old houses. Everyone in the county knew that. She lay back down. The laughter grew louder. She pressed her pillow over her ears. She squeezed her eyes shut. And finally, after what felt like an eternity, it ceased. But it returned the next night, and the night after that, and every single night for 2 weeks running. Always at 2:17 in the morning, always filling the house with that cold, mirthless, awful laughter. Clara stopped sleeping. Dark circles formed under her eyes. She lost weight. She began to leave every light in the house burning all through the night. But even the light didn't help, because sometimes, in the corner of a lighted room, she would see a shadow move. And then she would hear it. That laugh. Her neighbor, old Mr. Beaumont, noticed her condition when she came to borrow eggs one morning. He looked at her white, sunken face and said, "You must go see Father Renard." Father Edouard Renard was the priest of St. Michael's Church in the nearby village of Craftsbury. He was in his late 60s, a quiet French-Canadian with silver hair and calm gray eyes that had seen, in his decades of ministry, things that no seminary course ever prepared him for. He had blessed troubled homes before. He had sat with grieving families. He had prayed in rooms where the air felt thick and wrong. He was not a man who frightened easily. When Clara came to him on a Tuesday morning, shaking and tired, he listened to everything she had to say without interrupting. When she was finished, he folded his hands on his desk, looked at her directly, and said, "I will come tonight." At 11 o'clock that night, Father Renard came to the house on Hollow Creek Road with his well-worn leather Bible, a vial of holy water, and a small silver crucifix that had belonged to his own grandmother. He sat with Clara at the kitchen table, drank the tea she made for him, and waited. The house was silent as a tomb. Midnight passed. 1 o'clock passed. 2 o'clock passed. Then at 2:17, it came. The laughter burst into the house like water into a sinking ship, from all sides, from inside the walls, from beneath the floorboards, from above the ceiling. Clara clutched Father Renard's arm. The single kitchen light bulb shook furiously. Father Renard got up from his chair. He was not afraid. Or if he was, he did not show it. He walked slowly to the middle of the kitchen, raised his voice calm and clear above the sound of the laughter, and he spoke directly to it. "Enough," he said. "I hear you. I am listening. In the name of God, I ask you, why do you torment this girl? She has done nothing to you. She came here in peace. Why do you frighten her every night? Speak. I am giving you the chance to speak." The laughter stopped. The silence that followed was the deepest silence Clara had ever heard in her life. Even the wind outside had ceased to blow. Even the house had stopped creaking. And then a voice came. It was not the laughing voice. It was different, older, worn down with grief, like a stone that has been underwater for decades. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, from the walls, from the air itself, from somewhere just beyond the reach of human sight. And it said, "This is my house." Father Renard did not step back. He stood his ground. "Whose house?" he asked quietly. "Mine," the voice said. "My father built this house with his hands. My mother planted the garden you see outside. I was born in the room at the top of the stairs. This is my house, and I do not want to leave it." Clara, still at the kitchen table, felt a stinging sensation in her eyes. Not from fear this time, from something else entirely. From a sadness she did not yet understand. Father Renard spoke again, softly. "Who took this house from you? What happened here?" There was a long silence. The voice seemed to labor, as if speaking was an effort, as if hauling these words up from wherever they had been lodged was a monumental task. 40 years ago, the voice said. 40 years ago, men came to this road. Men with money and lawyers and documents. Men who wanted this land for themselves. My parents refused to sell. My father stood on that porch and told them to go away. He told them that this land had been in our family for 4 generations and would never be sold. They came back in the winter. In the dark, my parents were found at the bottom of the creek behind this house. They said it was an accident. No one was ever arrested. No one ever asked the right questions. Because the powerful ones, they were never asked questions at all. The temperature in the kitchen had plummeted. Clara could see her own breath in the air. The voice went on. "I was a child. I was sent away to relations after that. I never returned to this house. I spent my entire life trying to return and never could. And then I died, still trying. So here I am. Here I will always be. Because this is the only place I was ever truly home." Father Renard closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, his tone was softer than before. "And the girl, Clara, she has done nothing wrong. She came here with nowhere else to go. She is not your enemy." There was another long silence. Then the voice said, and this time something in it had changed. The anger was still there, but beneath the anger was something that was broken and exhausted and achingly human. "I know. Then why do you frighten her?" Father Renard asked. "Because I am lonely." A pause. "Because I forgot how to talk to the living. Because 40 years of silence in an empty house does strange things to what is left of a person. Because I did not know how to say," the voice broke for a moment, "I did not know how to say, I am still here. I am still here, and I have never stopped waiting for someone to ask why my parents had to die." Clara was crying now, silently, at the kitchen table. Father Renard stood there for a long time in silence. Then he said something that Clara would remember for the rest of her life. He said, "Your parents are remembered tonight. I speak their names before God. Matthew Deschamps, Elise Deschamps. Whatever was done to them in this darkness was not forgotten in the light. You are not alone in this house anymore. And you are not forgotten." The kitchen light ceased to flicker. The chill in the room slowly dissipated. When Father Renard left at almost 4 in the morning, the house on Hollow Creek Road was quiet. Not the tight-lipped, clenched teeth quiet it had been for weeks. A different kind of quiet. The quiet of something that has finally, after a very long time, been allowed to rest. Clara did not hear the laughter that night, or the next night. In the weeks that followed, Clara began to research the history of the property. She went to the Orleans County Courthouse. She searched through old newspaper archives. She discovered mentions of a family named Deschamps, farmers who had owned the land since the 1890s, and a two-paragraph article from the winter of 1984 about a couple found dead in a creek, determined to be an accidental drowning. She discovered the names of the influential men the voice had mentioned. She discovered the land sale that occurred only 3 months later. Clara presented all of this information to a local journalist. She presented it to a historian at a nearby university. She posted about it online. She made sure that after 40 years, someone was finally asking the right questions. She never moved out of the house on Hollow Creek Road. She repainted the porch. She dug out the old garden and planted it over. She replaced the creaking floorboards one by one. She stayed. And on some nights, not frightening nights, but gentle nights, she could have sworn she heard, very faintly, what sounded almost like a sigh of relief passing through the old walls of the house. Like the house itself was finally taking a deep breath. There are haunted places in this world that are haunted not because of evil, but because of grief. Not because of darkness, but because of injustice that was never righted. Not because something wants to harm you, but because something simply needs, more than anything else, to finally be heard. The next time you pass an old house on a deserted road and feel that chill run down your spine, maybe don't run from it. Maybe just listen. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning in October 2024, and it changed everything. Sarah Chin stared at her laptop screen in her cramped Brooklyn studio apartment, reading the message for the third time. The sender was listed as M. Holloway, with no profile picture, no signature, just a Gmail address that looked like it had been created that morning. Miss Chun, I found your podcast series on abandoned institutions. I have recordings from Kings Park Psychiatric Center that you need to hear. They're not what you think. Meet me at the Starbucks on Jericho Turnpike in Comac this Saturday at 2 p.m. Come alone. I can't send these digitally. You'll understand why when you hear them. Sarah was a documentary podcaster with a modest following, about 15,000 listeners who enjoyed her deep dives into forgotten places and the stories they held. She'd covered the history of several abandoned asylums across the Northeast, always careful to be respectful, always focused on the human stories rather than cheap thrills. But she'd never received anything like this. Kings Park Psychiatric Center. The name alone carried weight. The massive asylum had operated from 1885 to 1996 on Long Island's North Shore, housing thousands of patients at its peak. The campus sprawled across 873 acres, with over 100 buildings slowly decomposing in the salt air. Despite the no trespassing signs and regular police patrols, urban explorers had been sneaking in for decades, posting their photos and videos online. Sarah had researched it, but never visited. Too risky, too played out, too many people had already told that story. But recordings? That was different. She looked at the calendar on her wall. Saturday was 3 days away. She should delete the email. It could be anything. A prank, a setup, maybe even something dangerous. But curiosity had always been her weakness, or maybe her strength, depending on how you looked at it. On Saturday, Sarah took the LIRR from Penn Station to the Comac Station, then caught an Uber to the Starbucks. The fall air was crisp, leaves turning orange and red along the highway. Normal. Everything felt completely normal. Inside the coffee shop, she scanned the tables. Most were occupied by teenagers doing homework or young parents with strollers. Then she saw him, a man in his late 60s, sitting alone in the corner booth, nervously turning a foam cup in his hands. He wore a faded denim jacket and had the weathered face of someone who'd spent years working outdoors. When their eyes met, he gave a small nod. "Mr. Holloway?" Sarah asked, approaching. "Marcus," he said, not standing, not offering to shake hands. "Sit down, please." She slid into the booth across from him. Up close, she could see the dark circles under his eyes, the slight tremor in his hands. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. "You came alone?" he asked. "Yes." "Good." He reached into his jacket and pulled out an old Sony digital voice recorder, the kind that had been popular in the early 2000s. He placed it on the table between them like it was made of something fragile and dangerous. "I was a security guard at Kings Park from 1991 until it closed in 96. Night shift, mostly. After they shut it down, I was part of the skeleton crew that maintained the property for another 2 years. Made sure vandals didn't burn the place down, that kind of thing." Sarah pulled out her phone. "Do you mind if I record this?" No recording, he said sharply. Not of me. Listen first. Then decide what you want to do. She put her phone away. Okay, what's on the recorder? Marcus's jaw tightened. He pushed the device closer to her. In 1997, I was doing my rounds in Building 93. You know it. Sarah nodded. Building 93 was one of the most infamous structures on the campus. A massive, 13-story brick building that had once been the main psychiatric facility. It was the building that appeared in most of the Urban Explorer videos, with its long corridors, peeling paint, and rooms still scattered with old medical equipment. It was around 2 a.m. Marcus continued, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. I was on the 7th floor, checking for break-ins. The building was completely dark except for my flashlight. Then I heard it, voices, clear as day, coming from down the hall. I thought it was kids who'd snuck in, you know? Happened all the time. He paused, taking a shaky breath. But when I got closer, I realized the voices weren't in the hall. They were coming from inside one of the old patient rooms. And it wasn't kids. It sounded like a therapy session. A doctor and a patient having a conversation. But there was no one there. The room was empty. Sarah felt a chill despite the warm coffee shop. You recorded it? I always carried this. He tapped the recorder. Part of my job was to document any incidents, any damage, anything unusual. So yeah, I recorded it. I recorded a lot of things over those 2 years. Things that made me quit. Things that made me move off Long Island entirely. He looked directly into her eyes. I'm 70 years old now, Miss Chun. I've got maybe 5 years left, according to my doctor. Lung cancer. Before I die, I need someone to hear these. Someone who'll take them seriously. Someone who might be able to figure out what the hell was happening in that place. He stood up abruptly. The recorder is yours. All of it. I've got copies on a hard drive at home, but I wanted you to have the original. There are 43 recordings on there. Listen to them in order. Don't skip around. And whatever you do, he leaned down, his face deadly serious. Don't go to that building. Don't go trying to verify this. Just tell the story. That's all I'm asking. Before Sarah could respond, he was gone, weaving through the coffee shop and out the door, leaving her alone with the Sony recorder sitting on the table. She picked it up. It was heavier than she expected. The battery indicator showed it was fully charged. There was a small piece of masking tape on the back with the number 1 written in black marker. Sarah pressed play. Static. Then footsteps, echoing on linoleum. A man's breathing. Marcus, presumably. The squeak of a door opening. Then, distant but unmistakable, voices. Tell me about the dreams, Elizabeth. A woman's voice, thin and frightened. They're getting worse, doctor. Every night now. I see the water rising. I see them all drowning. The children from Ward C. I can hear them calling my name. And what do you do when you hear them calling? I try to help them. But I can't move. I'm frozen. And then I realize, I'm underwater too. We're all underwater. Marcus's whispered voice, very close to the microphone. Jesus Christ. There's no one here. The room is empty. The voices continued, unaffected by his presence. Elizabeth, we've discussed this. The incident in Ward C happened 30 years ago. You weren't even born yet. These aren't your memories. Then why do I know their names? Why can I see their faces? A long silence. Then the doctor's voice, troubled. We'll increase your medication. But Elizabeth, I need you to understand. The recording cut out with a harsh burst of static. Sarah sat in her apartment that night, headphones on, working through the recordings one by one. Marcus had been thorough in his documentation. Each file was labeled with a date, time, and location within the Kings Park complex. The second recording was from the same building, different floor. This time, Marcus had captured what sounded like footsteps following him, matching his pace exactly, stopping when he stopped. At one point, he ran, and the footsteps ran with him. But when he spun around, there was only silence and empty hallway. Recording number 7 was the one that made Sarah's hands go cold. Marcus's voice. This is November 3rd, 1997, 3:47 a.m. I'm in the tunnel system beneath Building 93. I've been hearing. He stopped abruptly. In the background, very faint, singing. A child's voice. Ring around the rosy, pocket full of posies. Marcus, hello? Who's there? You're not supposed to be down here. The singing continued, getting closer. But not from ahead of him, from all around him. multiple children's voices echoing through the tunnels. Ashes, ashes, we all fall down. Then screaming. Not the children, Marcus. The recorder captured his footsteps pounding on concrete, his panicked breathing, and underneath it all, the sound of small feet running, surrounding him, hurting him. The recording ended with Marcus bursting through a door. His voice, shaking. They were coming from the walls. From the fucking walls. Sarah paused the playback and stood up, needing to move, needing to process what she was hearing. She walked to her window and looked out at the Brooklyn street below. Cars passing, people walking dogs. The ordinary world, continuing as it always had. She thought about Marcus's warning, don't go to that building. Don't try to verify this. But she was a journalist. Verification was what she did. Over the next week, Sarah researched everything she could find about Kings Park Psychiatric Center. The official history, the patient records that had been digitized and archived, the newspaper articles from over the decades. What she found disturbed her more than the recordings themselves. In 1967, a fire in Ward C had killed 11 children, patients between the ages of 8 and 14 who'd been locked in for the night. The staff member who was supposed to be monitoring them had fallen asleep. By the time anyone noticed the smoke, it was too late. The Elizabeth from the first recording? Sarah found her too. Elizabeth Harmon, admitted to Kings Park in 1982 at age 19, diagnosed with severe psychosis and depression. According to the records, she claimed to have dreams about children drowning, calling her name. The attending psychiatrist's notes mentioned that Elizabeth had an unusual knowledge of the 1967 fire despite having no connection to the hospital at that time. Elizabeth Harmon had died at Kings Park in 1985. Suicide, according to the official report. She'd hanged herself in her room on the 7th floor of Building 93. The same floor where Marcus had recorded the therapy session in 1997, 12 years after Elizabeth's death. Sarah listened to more recordings. They varied in content, but shared a common thread. Sounds and voices that shouldn't exist in an empty building. Conversations between people who were long dead. Footsteps in rooms that had no occupants. And something Marcus called the whispering. A constant, low susurrus of voices that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves, especially in the basement levels. Recording 23 was different from the others. It was longer, nearly 40 minutes, and Marcus had added a verbal note at the beginning. This is the one that made me quit. December 18th, 1997. Last night I'll ever spend in that goddamn place. Sarah knew she was going to Kings Park before she admitted it to herself. The recordings were compelling, but they weren't enough. She needed to see the place, to understand the geography of Marcus's fear. She told herself she was just going to scout the exterior, maybe talk to some locals. She wouldn't go inside. That would be too risky, both legally and, if the recordings were genuine, perhaps in other ways as well. She reached out to her friend Devin, who'd helped with research on previous podcasts. Devin was a graduate student at NYU, studying anthropology, and he had a car, a crucial asset when investigating locations outside the city. Kings Park, Devin said when she called. Hell yeah, I'm in. I've always wanted to check that place out. They agreed to drive out on a Sunday morning. Sarah didn't tell him about the recordings. Not yet. She wanted his perspective to be fresh, unbiased. The drive from Manhattan took about an hour. As they crossed over to Long Island and headed east on the Long Island Expressway, Sarah felt her anxiety building. The October sky was overcast, threatening rain. You okay? Devin asked. You've been quiet. Just thinking about the story, Sarah said. They took the exit for Kings Park and drove through the town. It was quintessential Long Island suburban, strip malls, pizza places, nice houses with well-maintained lawns. Hard to imagine that just a few miles north, one of the most notorious abandoned psychiatric facilities in America was slowly rotting away. As they got closer to the waterfront, the buildings started to appear. Massive brick structures rising from the overgrown grounds, their windows empty, their facades stained with decades of neglect. The entire campus was fenced off, but sections of the fence had been cut and repaired so many times that it was clear the no trespassing signs were more of a suggestion than a deterrent. Devin parked on a side street adjacent to the property. From where they sat, they could see Building 93, the 13-story colossus that dominated the skyline. Jesus, Devin breathed. It's bigger than I thought. Sarah pulled out the Sony recorder and held it in her lap, running her thumb over the worn plastic. Before we go any further, I need you to listen to something. She gave him the headphones and played recording number 7, the one with the children singing in the tunnels. Devin's face went from curious to confused to genuinely unsettled. When it finished, he removed the headphones slowly. Where did you get this? A former security guard. He has 43 recordings like this, all from inside that building. Devin looked at Building 93, then back at Sarah. You're not seriously thinking about going in there. I just want to look around the exterior. Maybe talk to some people who live nearby. See if anyone else has had experiences. Sarah, I know, but this is the story, Devin. If even a fraction of what's on these recordings is real. They got out of the car. The afternoon was quiet except for the distant sound of the Long Island Sound and the rustling of leaves. They walked along the fence line, staying visible, not yet crossing the boundary into trespassing territory. That's when Sarah saw her. An elderly woman was working in the garden of a house that backed up to the hospital property. She looked to be in her 70s, wearing a sun hat despite the overcast sky. When she noticed them looking at the buildings, she straightened up. You reporters? She called out. Sarah and Devin exchanged glances. Something like that, Sarah said. I'm working on a podcast about the hospital's history. The woman walked closer to her fence, studying them. Name's Ruth Kowalski. I've lived here for 46 years. Moved in when my husband took a job at the hospital in 1978. Did he work there when it closed? Sarah asked. He died before that. 1989.
Go there for the project.
Heart attack, they said. But I know better. Ruth's expression was grim. That place took him. Took his mind first, then his body. What do you mean? Ruth glanced at Building 93, and Sarah could swear she saw the old woman shudder. My husband was an administrator. He worked in that building, the big one. Started coming home with stories about 6 months before he died. Sounds in empty rooms. Files that went missing and turned up in impossible places. Patients who'd been dead for years showing up on security cameras. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. Security cameras? Are there any recordings? All destroyed. Ruth interrupted. After the hospital closed, they wiped everything. Said it was for patient privacy, but I think they didn't want people to see what was really on those tapes. She paused. You seem like nice kids. Take my advice, don't go in there. Especially not at night. Especially not Building 93. Why Building 93 specifically? Devin asked. Because that's where they did the experiments, Ruth said quietly. The ones nobody talks about. The electroshock therapy, the lobotomies, the drug trials that weren't approved by any board. Building 93 was where they sent the patients nobody cared about. The ones without families. The ones who wouldn't be missed. Sarah thought about the recordings. The voices in empty rooms. Elizabeth and her drowning dreams. The children singing in the tunnels. Do you believe the place is haunted? She asked. Ruth looked at her for a long moment. I believe that suffering leaves marks, like stains that won't wash out. And there was more suffering in that building than any place has a right to contain. She turned to go back to her garden, then stopped. If you're going in anyway, and I can see from your faces that you probably are, don't go to the 7th floor. That's where the worst of it happened. That's where they concentrate. Sarah called out, but Ruth had already disappeared into her house. Sarah convinced Devin to wait until dusk. Not full darkness, she reasoned, but dim enough that they'd be less visible to any police patrols. They found a section of fence near the back of the property that had been cut and poorly re-welded. With some effort, they squeezed through. The grounds of Kings Park were a study in decay. Overgrown paths wound between buildings in various states of collapse. Some structures had completely caved in, their roofs crumpled like paper. Others stood relatively intact, silent witnesses to decades of abandonment. Everywhere Sarah looked, she saw the residue of lives lived and lost. Scattered medical equipment, old wheelchairs left to rust, filing cabinets with drawers hanging open, their contents long since scattered by wind and rain. Building 93 loomed ahead of them. Closer now, it was even more imposing, a red brick giant with empty window frames that looked like dead eyes. Vines crawled up its walls, nature slowly reclaiming what humans had abandoned. They reached the main entrance. The doors were boarded up, but someone had pried away the plywood. The opening led into darkness. We don't have to do this, Devin said. His earlier enthusiasm had evaporated. "We could just stay close to me," Sarah said, pulling out her flashlight. She had the Sony recorder in her other hand, set to record. "If anything feels wrong, we leave immediately." "Deal, deal." They stepped inside. The lobby was vast, with a high ceiling and what had once been a grand staircase leading to the upper floors. Debris covered the floor, chunks of fallen plaster, broken glass, the occasional piece of furniture too damaged to identify. The walls were covered in graffiti, layer upon layer of spray, paint forming a palimpsest of trespassers' messages. The air smelled of mold and decay, and something else, something organic and wrong. Sarah checked the recorder. It was working, capturing audio. She wasn't sure what she expected to hear, but she wanted to be ready. They moved deeper into the building, following a corridor that led toward the central stairwell. Their flashlights cut through the darkness, revealing room after room of destruction. Old patient rooms with beds still in place, stripped of mattresses. A nurse's station with charts scattered across the floor. A day room with peeling linoleum and broken windows that overlooked the sound. It was Devin who noticed it first. "Do you hear that?" Sarah stopped walking. She heard it too, a faint sound, barely distinguishable from the wind moving through the broken windows. Whispering. She raised the recorder, capturing it. The whispering seemed to have no source, no direction. It came from everywhere and nowhere. A constant murmur just below the threshold of comprehension. "Just the wind," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. They found the stairwell and started climbing. The darkness grew thicker as they ascended, their flashlight beams seeming to penetrate less and less. By the time they reached the 7th floor, Sarah's hands were shaking. The 7th floor hallway stretched before them, long and narrow. Unlike the lower floors, there was no graffiti here. The walls were bare, the paint peeling in long strips. The doors to the patient rooms stood open, revealing interiors swallowed by shadow. "This is where Marcus recorded most of his audio," Sarah whispered. They walked slowly down the hall, checking each room. All empty, all silent except for that persistent whispering that seemed to follow them. Then Sarah's flashlight beam caught something on the floor at the end of the hall. She walked toward it, her heart pounding. It was a Sony recorder, just like the one Marcus had given her. But that was impossible. Marcus had said he had copies on a hard drive. But this was... She picked it up, her mind refusing to process what she was seeing. It was old, the same model as hers, with the same wear patterns on the casing. There was even a piece of masking tape on the back, with a number written on it. 44. Devin was beside her now. "Sarah, what the fuck?" The whispering suddenly stopped. The silence was worse. Then, from somewhere below them, the sound of footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps climbing the stairs. Not from the 1st floor, they were already on the 7th. These footsteps were coming from above, but they were on the 7th floor. There were 6 more floors above them, but the recordings, Marcus's recordings. He'd only ever explored the lower 7 floors. He'd never gone higher because... Sarah grabbed Devin's arm. "We need to leave. Now." They ran toward the stairwell. The footsteps were getting closer, faster now, matching their panic. Sarah glanced back once and wished she hadn't. At the far end of the 7th floor hallway, figures were emerging from the patient rooms. Dark shapes that moved wrong, that flickered in and out of visibility like a strobe effect. They hit the stairwell and descended, taking the steps 2 at a time. Behind them, above them, the sounds multiplied, footsteps, whispers, that terrible children's song, "Ring Around the Rosie." They burst through the lobby and out into the evening air, not stopping until they'd cleared the fence and reached Devin's car. Sarah fumbled with the door handle, her hands trembling so badly she could barely grip it. Once inside, Devin started the engine and drove, neither of them speaking until they were back on the expressway, surrounded by the safe lights of traffic and civilization. Sarah looked at the recorder in her hand, the original one Marcus had given her. Still recording. She pressed stop and checked the file number. Recording 44. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "I told you not to go. Now you're part of it. Listen to the last recording. Then you'll understand." She played recording 43, the last one Marcus had made before quitting. His final night at Kings Park. Marcus's voice strained. December 18th, 1997. "I found something in the basement. Files. Old treatment records from the 1960s. They were running experiments, trying to transfer consciousness, trying to keep the dying patients alive by binding them to the building itself. It didn't work. It couldn't work. But something happened. Something went wrong in a way they couldn't have predicted. A pause. Then, the building isn't haunted. The building, I asked them. All of them. Every patient who died here. Trapped in the walls, in the floors, in the very structure. And they're aware. They know they're dead. They know they're trapped. And they're looking for a way out. The recordings I've been making, I thought I was documenting ghosts. But I'm not. I'm documenting them trying to communicate, trying to warn others, or trying to lure them in. I don't know anymore. What I do know is this. Every person who enters building 93 and makes it to the 7th floor, they leave something behind, a piece of themselves, and the building adds it to the collection. Static. Then Marcus's voice, barely a whisper. If you're listening to this, it means I gave you the recorder. It means I passed it on. I'm sorry, but now you're part of the chain. You're part of the story. And eventually, you'll feel the pull too. You'll need to go back. You'll need to record more. That's how it works. That's how it spreads. The building is hungry. It's always hungry. The recording ended. Sarah looked at the new recorder in her lap, number 44. She knew what was on it without listening. Her voice, her footsteps, her fear, captured and preserved, added to the collection. In her pocket, her phone buzzed again. Another text from Marcus, or whoever was using his phone. Don't fight it. You're a storyteller. Tell the story. Bring others. Help us grow. Sarah looked at Devin. He was gripping the steering wheel, his knuckles white. What was that back there? He asked. What did we see? She opened her mouth to answer, but found she couldn't. The words wouldn't come. Instead, she heard herself saying something else. We should go back. With better equipment. We should document this properly. This is the story of a lifetime. The words weren't hers. She knew they weren't hers. But she was saying them anyway. Devin glanced at her, and in his eyes, she saw the same hunger reflecting back. The building had touched them both. That night, Sarah uploaded the recordings to her computer and started editing. She told herself it was for the podcast, for her audience. But deep down, she knew the truth. She was creating advertisement, bait, drawing others to Building 93, because the building was hungry. And now, so was she.
The rain had been falling over Portland, Oregon for 11 consecutive days. Marcus Webb didn't mind the rain. He was the kind of man who found comfort in grey skies and the rhythmic drumming of water against window glass. At 34 years old, he lived alone in a modest apartment on the eastern edge of the city, worked as a freelance graphic designer, and spent his evenings reading thick paperback novels with a cup of black coffee steaming on the table beside him. His life was quiet. Deliberately quiet. He had spent years carving out that quietness after a turbulent youth, and he wore it like armor. His neighbors knew him as the polite man on the 3rd floor who always held the elevator door and never played music too loud. His clients knew him as reliable, talented, and punctual. His friends, and there were only a handful of them, knew him as someone who laughed easily but rarely talked about himself in any deep or meaningful way. Marcus was, by every measurable standard, an ordinary man. But ordinary men, as history has shown again and again, can find themselves in the most extraordinary and terrifying of circumstances. And Marcus Webb was about to discover that the quiet life he had so carefully constructed was sitting directly on top of something ancient, something hungry, and something that had been watching him for a very long time. It began with the job listing. He had been scrolling through a freelance platform on a Tuesday evening when an unusually formatted post caught his eye. It was looking for a graphic designer with experience in symbolic iconography, occult aesthetics, and ceremonial visual design. The pay was extraordinary. 3 times his normal rate, with a deposit paid up front before any work was even submitted. The client name was listed simply as the Meridian Circle, and the address for the initial consultation was on the outskirts of the city, up in the forested hills of the West Hills neighborhood, where old money and older secrets tended to hide behind iron gates and overgrown hedgerows. Marcus should have scrolled past it. He applied that same night. The consultation meeting was scheduled for a Friday evening, which Marcus thought was an odd time for a business meeting. But the deposit had already cleared in his bank account, a flawless transfer of $2,000, and the instructions in the follow-up email had been polite, professional, and oddly specific. He was told to arrive precisely at 9 o'clock. He was told to park his car at a designated spot 2 blocks from the address and walk the rest of the way. He was told not to bring anyone with him, which the email framed as a matter of client confidentiality. The walk through the wooded street was unsettling in ways Marcus couldn't immediately name. The streetlights seemed spaced too far apart, leaving long stretches of complete darkness between their pale orange pools of light. The trees on either side of the road were enormous, their branches so thick and interwoven overhead that even the faint glow of the overcast city sky was blocked out entirely. His footsteps sounded too loud on the wet pavement. Somewhere in the trees, something moved, too large to be a bird, too quiet to be a dog. The house, when he finally reached it, was massive. It sat far back from the road behind a wrought iron fence that stretched in both directions and disappeared into the darkness. The gate was open, as though expecting him. The driveway was lined with tall, sculpted hedges that had been trimmed into shapes Marcus couldn't quite identify in the darkness, shapes that seemed almost figurative, almost human, almost reaching. The house itself was a Victorian-era mansion, easily 100 years old, with tall narrow windows through which warm amber light glowed from behind heavy curtains. At the front door stood a man in a dark suit who introduced himself simply as Aldrich and who had the kind of face that seemed perfectly pleasant and yet communicated nothing whatsoever about the person behind it. "Mr. Webb," Aldrich said, extending a hand. "The Circle has been looking forward to meeting you." Inside, the house was immaculate. Dark wood paneling, Persian rugs in deep crimsons and blacks, oil paintings that depicted landscapes Marcus didn't recognize, vast, flat plains under skies filled with too many moons, forests that seemed to contain structures that no forest should contain. He was led through a hallway and into a large sitting room where a group of people were gathered, perhaps 15 or 20, all dressed well, all impossibly calm. They explained themselves as a philosophical society with an interest in esoteric and symbolic traditions. They needed someone to redesign their organizational materials, letterheads, ceremonial documents, insignia, and what they called their ritual iconography. They showed him samples of what they currently had. The symbols were complex, ancient-looking, drawn from traditions Marcus vaguely recognized as having roots in old European occultism. He told them he could do the work. He told himself it was just graphic design. Just symbols. Just lines and shapes arranged on paper. He told himself that several more times on the drive home, which suggested, even to him, that he didn't entirely believe it. Over the following 3 weeks, Marcus worked on the project from his apartment, communicating with Aldrich by email. The work itself was fascinating from a purely aesthetic standpoint, intricate, layered, demanding the kind of obsessive attention to geometric detail that Marcus genuinely enjoyed. He told himself he was simply a craftsman being paid to execute a client's vision, the same way a printer isn't responsible for the content of the books he prints. But the requests grew stranger. At first, they asked for adjustments to existing symbols, small changes to angles, proportions, the direction certain elements faced. Then they asked for original compositions, described in language that was technical and precise in ways that felt ritualistic rather than artistic. One email contained a passage that read, "The central figure must face the left hand, the spiral must terminate at the 7th rotation, and the outer ring must contain exactly 44 divisions, no more, no fewer. The geometry is not decorative. It is functional." Marcus started having dreams. Not nightmares, exactly. Not at first. They were simply strange. He would find himself standing in a vast, dark room while figures in hooded robes moved slowly around him in a circle, chanting in a language he couldn't identify. He never felt afraid in the dreams, which in retrospect was the strangest part of all. He felt calm. He felt like he belonged there. Then Aldrich called him. Not an email this time. A phone call, at 11:30 on a Thursday night, from a number that didn't appear on his screen. Aldrich's voice was exactly as pleasant and revealing as his face had been. He told Marcus that the Circle was very pleased with his work. He told him there was a final phase of the project that could only be completed in person, at the Circle's primary gathering place. He told Marcus that this location was not in Portland. "Where is it?" Marcus asked. There was a brief pause. A few hours east. We'll send a car. Saturday evening. I don't know, Marcus said. The completion fee, Aldrich said, is $20,000. Marcus went. The car that arrived on Saturday was a black SUV with tinted windows and a driver who said nothing whatsoever for the entire journey. They drove east on Interstate 84, into the Columbia River Gorge, and then turned off onto roads that grew progressively smaller and less maintained. Until they were moving along what was essentially a dirt track through dense coniferous forest. Marcus watched his phone's GPS lose signal somewhere around the second hour of driving, and he told himself this was simply because they were in a remote area, not because anything was wrong. He was wrong about that. After approximately 3.5 hours, they stopped. There was no building visible from where the SUV parked. Just forest, dark and thick and utterly silent except for the wind through the treetops. But Aldrich was waiting there, along with 2 other members of the circle, holding lanterns, actual oil lanterns, not flashlights, and they led Marcus along a narrow path through the trees that descended gradually into a shallow valley. And then he saw it. It wasn't a house. It wasn't a compound. It was an entrance, a stone archway built directly into the side of a rock face, ancient-looking, carved with symbols that Marcus recognized from the iconography he had spent weeks reproducing. Beyond the archway were stone steps leading downward. "What is this place?" Marcus asked. "It's been here much longer than we have," Aldrich said pleasantly. "Come." They descended for what felt like 4 or 5 minutes, the stone steps worn smooth by what must have been centuries of feet, the lantern light throwing wild shadows on the curved stone walls of the passage. The air grew colder and stranger, not stale, as you might expect underground air to be, but charged, somehow. Electric. Like the air before a lightning strike, sustained indefinitely. The passage opened into a chamber. Marcus stopped walking. The chamber was vast, impossibly vast, given how little they had descended. It had a ceiling lost in darkness 50 or 60 feet above and walls that curved away on all sides. It was lit by hundreds of candles placed in iron holders and in alcoves carved into the rock. At the center of the chamber was a large circular floor engraving, perhaps 30 feet across. Filled with exactly the kind of complex geometric iconography Marcus had spent weeks designing. Around the room's perimeter, on stone benches and standing in clusters, were members of the circle, dozens of them now, far more than he had seen at the house in Portland. They were all watching him. And in the alcoves carved into the walls, behind thick iron bars, were things that Marcus could not immediately process. He took several steps closer to the nearest alcove before his mind caught up with what his eyes were showing him and sent an overwhelming signal to his legs to stop moving. In the alcoves were artifacts. Objects. But not ordinary objects. There were things that seemed to absorb the light around them rather than reflect it. There were items whose shapes changed slightly depending on the angle from which you looked at them. There were substances in sealed vessels that moved of their own accord, pressing against the glass in ways that bore an uncomfortable resemblance to hands. There was, in one alcove, something that appeared to be a mirror but that reflected a room entirely different from the one Marcus was standing in. "What is this?" Marcus said. His voice came out smaller than he intended. Aldrich stood beside him, still pleasant, still revealing nothing. "This," he said, "is the repository. Things brought here from across centuries. From across traditions. From across thresholds that most people never come close enough to even know exist." He paused. "The iconography you designed will serve as the updated sealing and binding language for much of what you see here. Your work, Mr. Webb, is genuinely important." "Binding," Marcus repeated. "To keep certain things where they are," Aldrich said. "And to invite certain other things to come closer." That was the moment Marcus understood, fully and completely, that he needed to leave this place. Not tomorrow. Not after the payment cleared. Not after the work was done. But he didn't leave immediately, and this was partly because his legs had stopped cooperating in any useful way, and partly because what happened next happened very quickly and held him in place with the pure mechanical grip of horror. The members of the circle arranged themselves around the floor engraving. Aldrich moved to a position at the circle's northern point. Someone extinguished half the candles in the room, dropping it into deep shadow. Someone else produced a sound, not music, exactly, but a kind of tonal resonance that seemed to come from the walls themselves rather than from any instrument or human throat. And the engraving on the floor began to do something. The lines, Marcus's lines, his carefully constructed geometric precision, began to emit a faint luminescence. Not a glow, exactly. More like the lines were becoming briefly, shallowly transparent, as though the floor were made of very thick glass and something beneath it was catching light. The resonance deepened. The temperature in the chamber dropped sharply enough that Marcus could see his own breath. In the center of the engraving, the air began to behave incorrectly. It shimmered, the way air does above hot asphalt in summer. But it was cold. The shimmer deepened into distortion, into something that pulled at the light around it, and within that distortion Marcus could see, or believed he could see, suggestions of form. Tall form. Asymmetric. Utterly, completely wrong in proportion and posture and implication. Aldrich began to speak. The language was not any language Marcus had ever heard. It wasn't Latin, which he might have expected from the clichés of such things. It was something older. Something that sounded less like speech and more like the idea of speech, like the shape that language would have if language had been invented before mouths were. The form in the distortion became slightly more defined. Marcus turned and ran for the passage. Nobody stopped him. Which, he would later realize, was the most terrifying part of the whole experience. They let him run. They didn't need to stop him, because they already knew what was waiting for him in the darkness between where he was and where he desperately needed to be. The stone passage back toward the surface was dark. The lantern that had guided him down was gone, there was no one ahead of him, and the faint luminescence from the chamber behind him faded quickly as the passage curved. He had his phone, and the flashlight on it still worked even without signal, and he held it out in front of him with a hand that was shaking badly enough to make the light jitter on the stone walls. He moved fast. The steps were steep and he took them two at a time, one hand on the cold stone wall for balance. He had gone perhaps 30 steps when he heard something behind him. Not footsteps. Not the sound of pursuit. Something else. A sound that had no immediate real-world equivalent, a kind of low, wet resonance, like the sound of something very large breathing through a medium that wasn't air. It came from below him. It was getting closer. Marcus ran faster. The flashlight flickered. He stopped running, because in the dark on steep stone steps, running becomes falling, and falling becomes something much worse. He stood very still, breathing as quietly as he could, and held the phone steady until the flashlight stabilized. That was when he saw the shadow. It was on the wall to his left, approximately 12 feet ahead of him. The problem was that there was nothing casting it. The passage was empty ahead of him. The shadow was there regardless, the distinct, projected shape of something standing between a light source and a surface, except that there was no light source and there was certainly nothing standing there. The shadow moved. It moved like a person moves, a slow, deliberate shift of weight, and it raised one arm in a gesture that was almost welcoming. Which was the most horrifying gesture Marcus Webb had ever witnessed in his entire life. He pressed himself against the opposite wall and edged past it without looking directly at it, the way you might handle a dangerous animal that reacts to direct eye contact. His heart was performing extraordinary percussive experiments against the inside of his ribs. He kept moving. He did not look back. He had made it perhaps another 20 steps when the temperature dropped again. This time it was localized. A column of cold, directly in the center of the passage ahead of him, dense and clearly defined, he could see where the cold air met the warmer passage air in a sharp line, the way warm and cold fronts meet in weather. He stopped at the boundary of the cold column and pointed his flashlight into it. There was a figure standing in the passage. It was tall enough that it had to stoop under the ceiling, which meant it was well over 6 feet. Its proportions were wrong in ways that took a moment to catalogue, the torso too long, the arms too long, the neck bent at an angle that no functional spine should allow. It appeared to be facing away from Marcus. Its clothing, if that was what it was wearing, seemed to shift and resettle constantly, as though caught in a wind that existed only around it. It made no sound. It was a djinn. Marcus knew this the way you sometimes know things in moments of extremity, not through knowledge or reasoning but through something older and more physical than either of those things. Something in the deep, ancient hardware of his nervous system recognized what it was looking at and supplied the word without any conscious input from Marcus himself. He stood completely still for what felt like several minutes but was probably closer to 40 seconds. The figure did not move. Marcus took one step to the left, pressing as far against the wall as the passage would allow. Then another. Then another, edging sideways past the figure with his back to the cold stone wall and his eyes locked on the figure's back. The cold intensified as he moved alongside it, a biting, cellular cold that felt like it was pulling warmth out of him rather than simply surrounding him with its absence. He made it past. He walked, not ran, walked, because he had learned something valuable about drawing attention for the next 100 feet. Then he ran again, because the sound from below had returned, louder now, and was accompanied by a new sound from somewhere ahead and above him, a chorus of something that was adjacent to whispering but not quite, the way margarine is adjacent to butter but not quite. A chorus of almost whispering from all directions at once, from inside the walls, or possibly from inside his own skull, he genuinely couldn't determine which. The flashlight flickered again. This time it went out entirely. Complete darkness underground is different from any other darkness you will ever experience. It is not the darkness of a room with the lights off, where your eyes will eventually find the thin line of light under the door or the faint blue glow of a standby light somewhere. It is not the darkness of being outside on a cloudy night, where there is always some diffuse atmospheric glow. Complete underground darkness is the real thing. It has weight. It has presence. It sits on your eyes like a physical pressure and does not relent regardless of how long you wait. Marcus stood very still and fought the flashlight. He pressed the button again and again. He slapped the side of the phone against his palm. He told himself, very calmly and clearly in the most reasonable voice his internal monologue could manage, that he was not going to die in a stone tunnel under an Oregon forest, and that the flashlight was going to come back on, and that he was going to reach the surface, and that everything was going to be fine. Then something touched the back of his neck. It was light. Barely perceptible. The faintest possible brush of contact, cold and dry, like the tip of a finger with no warmth in it at all. He spun around and found nothing. He found nothing, that is, in the sense of finding an absence of visible things, which in complete darkness meant precisely nothing. He pressed himself against the wall and slid one foot forward. Then the other. One hand on the wall, the phone clutched in his other hand with a grip that was leaving marks in his palm, moving forward in the dark by feel and by faith and by the pure, distilled, biological imperative to get out. The whispering grew louder. He couldn't make out words, he wasn't sure they were words, but the cadence of the whispering had the rhythm of instruction, of command, as though something was issuing directions to things he couldn't see. He heard movement alongside him on both sides, not footsteps exactly, but displacement, the sound of something passing through space, multiple somethings, moving in the same direction he was moving and at roughly the same pace. He was being escorted. Whether toward the exit or away from it, he had no way of knowing. Then his foot hit the bottom of the steps, the transition from flat ground to the first rising step, and he nearly sobbed with relief. He grabbed the wall with both hands and went up on all fours, feeling each step with his hands before putting his weight on it, moving like an animal, and for once in his life Marcus Webb was perfectly fine with moving like an animal. Animals, it occurred to him, had very sensible and practical feelings about darkness and about things that lived in it. He was 3/4 of the way up the steps when the flashlight came back on. The light swept the passage ahead of him and revealed it to be empty. Walls, steps, stone, nothing else. He kept moving and did not look behind him. The trees were enormous. He knew this, had noticed it on the way in. But at night, moving fast through them with only a phone flashlight and the shreds of his composure for company, they were something else entirely. They were columns in a cathedral built by something that didn't have humanity's architecture in mind. Their trunks were so wide that 2 men couldn't circle them with joined hands. Their branches overhead were a black lattice against a slightly less black sky. He ran along the path, following it by feel and by memory, heading for the dirt road where the SUV had parked. He had been running for perhaps 2 minutes when the path changed. He wasn't sure how he knew it, but he knew it the same way he'd known the figure in the passage. The path was wrong now. It looked the same. It felt the same underfoot. But it was going in a different direction. He stopped, breathing hard, and shone his flashlight on the trees around him, looking for landmarks. He found none. The forest at night, at this distance from any light source, at this density, was perfectly undifferentiated. Every direction looked identical. He stood there for a moment and became aware, in the particular way that certain moments demand awareness, that he was not alone. The forest around him contained things. He couldn't see them. He could hear them, not movement exactly, but presence, the way a room sounds different when it's occupied than when it's empty, some combination of displaced air and subliminal sound that registers below the threshold of conscious hearing but not below the threshold of feeling. The forest was occupied in a way it hadn't been 20 minutes ago. He thought about what he knew. He was a graphic designer from Portland. He had spent 3 weeks drawing symbols he had been told were functional. He was currently standing in a forest in the middle of the night with entities of unclear nature surrounding him on all sides. The sensible thing, he thought, with the grim clarity that extreme situations sometimes provide, would have been to not apply for the job listing. But he was here. And the only person getting him out of here was him. He turned off the flashlight. This was a decision that went against every instinct he possessed, but he made it deliberately and for specific reasons. The flashlight made him visible. It made him a point of light in darkness, which meant it made him a target and a reference point for anything that was looking for him. Darkness, terrifying as it was at least indiscriminate. If he was invisible, so was everything else. And if everything else was already oriented toward him in ways that had nothing to do with his visibility, he had lost nothing by making himself harder to see. He stood in the total darkness of the forest and breathed. He oriented himself by smell. Forest air in the Pacific Northwest has a particular character, the cold, resinous smell of Douglas fir and western red cedar, the damp smell of moss and forest floor, and beneath it all, the faint mineral smell of rock and soil. He had grown up near forests. He had hiked in forests throughout his 20s. He knew what a forest at elevation smelled like. He also knew that the dirt road the car had parked on was downslope. They had descended into the valley on the way to the chamber, which meant the road was upslope, which meant he needed to find the slope and follow it up. He felt for the angle of the ground with his feet, found it, and moved. He moved slowly. He moved through absolute darkness through a forest at night using nothing but the angle of the slope under his feet and the ancient, animal orientation of a human nervous system that had not forgotten, in all its centuries of civilization, what it was like to navigate by the most fundamental available information. Branches caught at his face and arms. The ground was uneven, root systems, rocks, the unpredictable topology of old forest floor. He tripped twice and caught himself. Once he walked directly into a tree trunk, putting both hands out into the impact, and stood against it for a moment with his forehead against the bark and his eyes closed, which was a meaningless gesture in complete darkness but which helped somehow anyway. The things in the forest stayed with him. He could feel them. They moved when he moved, stopped when he stopped, and at several points he felt with certainty that there was something directly beside him, a foot away, perhaps less, pacing him through the dark with no sound and no warmth and no weight to its footsteps. He did not turn to look. Partly because there was nothing to see. Partly because he understood, on that deep animal level, that acknowledgement was a form of engagement, and engagement was something he could not afford. He climbed. He climbed for what felt like a very long time. He heard his name. This was the most insidious thing the darkness threw at him, and he recognized it as such even as it drove spikes of cold fear through him. He heard his name spoken clearly, in a voice he recognized, the voice of his mother, dead 11 years, spoken with her particular inflection, her particular warmth, from somewhere to his left and perhaps 30 feet away. "Marcus," the voice said. "Over here. This way." He kept moving upslope and did not turn left. He heard his name again, this time in the voice of his old college roommate Daniel, who was alive and living in Chicago and who Marcus had spoken to on the phone just 3 days ago. "Marcus, man, I'm over here. Come this way." The voice was perfect. The voice was Daniel's voice in every measurable respect. It came from his right. He kept moving. His name from his ex-girlfriend. His name from a former colleague. His name from someone he didn't recognize, then someone he did, a childhood friend, a neighbor from his first apartment, a professor from a class he'd taken at Portland State. All from different directions. All in perfect, convincing voices. All inviting him to come toward them. None of them in the direction he was going. He thought about something he'd read, long ago, in a book he could no longer specifically identify, about the nature of certain entities that existed in the spaces between defined and definable things. The book had said, and Marcus had read it as mythology, as folklore, as the kind of cultural narrative that contains metaphorical rather than literal truth, that these entities were fundamentally parasitic in their engagement with human consciousness. They could perceive what you most wanted to hear, the book had said, and they could produce it. They could reach into the back rooms of your memory and emerge with your mother's voice, your best friend's face, the exact smell of a home you had loved. They could. But there were two things they couldn't do. They couldn't tell the truth. And they couldn't cross a threshold you were actively maintaining. The book had called it an intention boundary, which sounded mystical and which Marcus was deciding to interpret as practically as possible. He was intending, with every molecule of his body and mind, to reach that road. He was not wavering. He was not giving the darkness or its inhabitants any gap in his intention to push through. His name. His name. His name. From all directions now, a chorus of voices he loved and voices he merely recognized, all calling him sideways, all calling him back, none of them calling him forward and up. He kept climbing. The ground leveled. He turned on the flashlight. He was standing on the dirt road. The car was 40 feet away. The driver was sitting behind the wheel, and Marcus understood immediately that this driver was either a member of the circle who would take him back rather than out, or was something wearing the idea of a driver the same way the forest's inhabitants had worn the voices of people he knew. Either way, Marcus was not getting in that car. He turned and ran along the road. He ran in the direction he calculated the paved road to be downhill, the way they'd come in, and he ran with his flashlight on and his eyes forward and the chorus of voices behind him now, fading gradually, as though the distance were genuinely weakening them. The dirt track went on for almost a mile. It felt like 10. Then it connected with pavement, and the pavement had a center line, and the center line was one of the most beautiful things Marcus Webb had ever seen. He walked along the paved road for 40 minutes before headlights appeared in the distance. He flagged them down with his phone flashlight, and a man in a pickup truck from a small town 30 miles east stopped and asked him if he was all right. "Car trouble," Marcus said, which was the simplest version of the truth available. The man drove him to a gas station with a payphone, an actual payphone, remarkable in 2024, and Marcus called a cab company that operated out of Hood River, and the cab took him to Hood River, and he took a bus from Hood River to Portland, arriving back in the city at 6:30 on a Sunday morning. He went to his apartment. He locked the door. He sat in the middle of his kitchen floor with his back against the cabinet under the sink and his knees drawn up, and he stayed there until the sun was fully up and the sounds of the city, traffic and birds and a neighbor's television and the distant sound of a coffee grinder had fully reconstituted the ordinary world around him. Then he did several specific and practical things. He called his bank and disputed the deposit, which he fully expected the bank to be unable to assist with, but which he felt was at least documentable. He called a friend, not Daniel in Chicago, not yet. He couldn't yet deal with hearing that voice come from a mouth he trusted, but a different friend, a woman named Priya who was practical and steady and who listened to his account without interruption and who said, at the end, "You need to tell me which road you were on, because we need to know where that place is." He told her. She wrote it down. He deleted every file on his computer related to the project. Every symbol, every draft, every version. He did this methodically and then ran secure deletion software over the drive, which he had never previously had occasion to use. He filed a report with the Portland Police Department, which did not go especially well, but which created a record. And then he called Daniel. Daniel answered on the second ring, cheerful and unchanged, knowing nothing about forests or darkness or what his voice sounds like when worn like a costume. "Hey man," Daniel said. "You okay? You sound weird." "Yeah," Marcus said. "I'm going to be." He paused. "Hey. How do you feel about a visit? I was thinking I might come to Chicago for a few weeks." "Obviously yes," Daniel said. "What's going on?" "I'll tell you when I get there," Marcus said. He booked a flight that same afternoon. He has not returned to Portland. He has not encountered anything anomalous since the night of his escape, though he is aware this may simply mean that what he encountered in those woods and in that passage operates on a timescale that has no particular urgency. He knows that the people of the Meridian Circle are still out there. He knows the chamber beneath the Oregon forest still exists. He knows the iconography he designed, even deleted, even gone from his machine, exists in the minds of those who commissioned it and in the stone floor of that enormous underground chamber. He knows that he got out. He knows, also, that the thing in the center of the geometric design, the thing that was becoming slightly more defined as the chanting rose and the temperature fell and the air turned wrong, was not, on that particular evening, finished becoming. He knows that it is still working on that. And on the worst nights, in Daniel's guest room in Chicago with the city lights making the curtains glow a comfortable amber, Marcus Webb lies awake and thinks about thresholds and intentions and the careful, exhausting work of maintaining them. He checks the locks. He leaves the light on. He waits for morning. And somewhere beneath the forest, in a chamber that has existed longer than the nation above it, in the language of geometry and intention and the functional grammar of symbols drawn by an ordinary man's careful hand, something waits, too. He knows, also, that the thing in the center of the geometric design, the thing that was becoming slightly more defined as the chanting rose and the temperature fell and the air turned wrong, was not, on that particular evening, finished becoming. He knows that it is still working on that. And on the worst nights, in Daniel's guest room in Chicago with the city lights making the curtains glow a comfortable amber, Marcus Webb lies awake and thinks about thresholds and intentions and the careful, exhausting work of maintaining them. He checks the locks. He leaves the light on. He waits for morning. And somewhere beneath the forest, in a chamber that has existed longer than the nation above it, in the language of geometry and intention and the functional grammar of symbols drawn by an ordinary man's careful hand, something waits, too.
Sleepy Hollow, Hudson Valley, 1790s. A town so drenched in darkness the locals said the air itself was bewitched. Shadows moved without wind. Owls called it noon. And every soul in that valley knew, feared, one name above all others. The Headless Horseman, a Hessian soldier, decapitated by a cannonball during the Revolutionary War, buried headless in the old churchyard. And every midnight, he rose, mounted his black stallion, and thundered through the valley searching for what the battlefield stole from him. His missing head. One rule kept the living safe. He cannot cross the bridge over the creek. Nobody had ever tested that rule and survived to confirm it. Enter Ichabod Crane, schoolteacher, Connecticut, gangly as a scarecrow, nervous as a cat in a thunderstorm, a man who believed every ghost story ever told, which made Sleepy Hollow the single worst place on earth for him to live. But Ichabod had two reasons to stay: food, and Katrina Van Tassel, the beautiful only daughter of the richest farmer in the valley. One problem: Brom Bones, massive, fearless, and furious, had already claimed Katrina as his. He despised Ichabod, and he was very good at waiting. One October night, a party, a heartbreak, a dark road home. Ichabod Crane rode into the Halloween forest alone, humiliated, lovesick, and terrified of every shadow. He had good reason. Something was waiting in the clearing, massive, cloaked, silent, and where the head should have been, nothing. He ran, full gallop. The horseman matched every stride. One chance, one bridge. Cross it and live. He cannot follow past the water. Gunpowder hit the planks like thunder. They crossed. Ichabod spun around. The horseman stopped at the edge. It worked. Then the arm drew back. And through. They found his hat the next morning, next to a smashed pumpkin. No body. No Ichabod. Ever again. Brom Bones married Katrina that spring, and whenever the horseman came up, Brom laughed. That specific laugh. The one that knows too much. Some nights, when the fog rolls off the Hudson, you can still hear the hoofbeats. Getting closer. Always closer. 112 Ocean Avenue, Amityville, New York. To most people, it looks like just another house. A beautiful Dutch colonial sitting right on the water. But for one family, it became a living nightmare. A nightmare, they say, never really ended. It started on November 13th, 1974. Ronald DeFeo Jr., a 23-year-old man, took a rifle and shot his entire family in their sleep. His mother, his father, his 4 brothers and sisters, all 6 of them, dead, in the same house, on the same night. When the police asked Ronald why he did it, he said, "I heard voices. They told me to do it." Ronald DeFeo Jr. was convicted of 6 counts of murder. He was sent to prison for life. But the story was just beginning. Just 13 months after the murders, a new family moved in. George and Kathy Lutz, with their 3 young children. They knew about the killings. The price was too good to pass up. Big house. Beautiful location. How bad could it be? On the very first night, the family priest, Father Perez, came to bless the house. He was sprinkling holy water in one of the bedrooms when he heard it. A deep, angry voice. It said just 2 words, "Get out." The priest left immediately. He later told the Lutzes, "Do not use that room. Whatever is in there does not want you here." What happened next is one of the most terrifying paranormal accounts in American history. Green slime oozed from the walls and ceiling. Swarms of flies, thousands of them, appeared in the dead of winter. Doors and windows were ripped off their hinges by an invisible force. Kathy Lutz woke up one night levitating 2 feet off the bed. Her face had transformed into the face of an old, terrifying woman. Their young daughter, Missy, began talking to an imaginary friend. She called her Jody. Jody, she said, was a pig. A demon pig with glowing red eyes. George Lutz stopped sleeping. Every single night, he woke up at exactly 3:15 a.m., the same time that Ronald DeFeo had committed the murders. George began to change. He became cold, distant, angry. His family said he looked less and less like himself, and more like Ronald DeFeo. After just 28 days, the Lutz family grabbed their children and ran. They left everything behind. The furniture, their clothes, their car. They never went back. The Lutzes told their story to author Jay Anson. He wrote it all down in a book called The Amityville Horror. It became one of the best-selling horror books of all time. Then came the movies. Then the investigations. Skeptics say the whole thing was made up. A story invented to sell books and make money. But the Lutzes? They stuck to their story until the day they died. Kathy Lutz passed away in 2004. George Lutz passed away in 2006. Both of them never changed a single detail. People still drive by just to look at it. New families have lived there since the Lutzes. Most of them say nothing strange ever happened. But then again, that's exactly what you'd say if something told you to get out. Do you believe in the Amityville Horror? Subscribe for more true paranormal stories every week. They weren't trying to do anything bad. They just wanted to see it. They had heard the stories all their lives, and they thought, it's just an old cemetery. What's the worst that could happen? They parked at the bottom of the hill just after 11 at night. The sky was clear. The moon was up. They could see their breath in the cold air. Mark had a flashlight. Ryan had his phone to record video. They walked up the hill slowly, laughing a little, trying to keep things light. But as they got closer to the old stone walls of the church, the laughing stopped. It was quiet. Not the normal kind of quiet. The kind of quiet where you realize there are no bugs, no wind, no sounds from the road. Nothing. Just 5 people standing very still on a cold hill in the dark. Dana later said, "I've been in quiet places before. Woods, empty fields. But this was different. It felt like the quiet was watching." They walked into the old church walls. The stone was cold. The ground inside was all dirt and dead grass. In one corner, there was a dark hole in the ground, maybe 3 feet across. Old boards had been put over it to cover it, but some of them had broken or moved. Tom pointed his flashlight into the hole. The light went down about 6 feet, then hit dirt. Just a hole. Maybe an old well. Maybe an old cellar. No one knows for sure what it was for. But Ryan, who had been filming, said later that when he pointed his phone at the hole, the screen went black. Not dark, black. And the recording stopped on its own. The phone was fully charged. He still has no explanation for it. They stood inside the ruined church for maybe 5 minutes. Then Jess said, "We should go." No one argued. They turned around and started walking back through the opening in the stone wall, toward the graveyard and down the hill. That's when Mark stopped. He put his hand up. Everyone froze. From somewhere behind them, from inside the ruined church, they heard a sound. It was not a loud sound. It was low, almost like humming, but not quite. It was more like the sound of many voices, very far away, all speaking at the same time, but you could not make out any words. Just this low, steady, moving sound. Like something breathing. Like something saying your name in a language you do not know. "I've tried to explain it 100 times, Ryan said. "The closest I can get is, it sounded like the ground was talking." They ran. All 5 of them ran down that hill as fast as they could. They did not look back. They jumped in the car. Mark drove. He didn't slow down until they were back on the main road, with the lights of Lawrence in front of them. Nobody talked for a long time. Finally, Dana said, "Did you all hear that?" They all had. The next day, Ryan checked his phone. The video he had tried to take at the hole, the one that went black, was gone. The file was there, but when he opened it, there was nothing. Just 20 seconds of pure silence. No image. No light. Just silence. The old ruined church at Stull Cemetery was finally torn down by the county in 2002. They said it was a safety problem. But many people think the real reason was that too many people were coming at night, and too many of them were coming back with stories like this one. The graveyard is still there, though. The hill is still there. The hole in the ground. If it was ever covered up, no one knows for sure. And every year, on Halloween night, people still drive out to Stull. They park at the bottom of the hill. Some of them go up. Some of them don't make it to the top before they turn around. Mark, Dana, Jess, Tom, and Ryan have never gone back. They've never talked much about that night, even with each other. But once, a few years later, Mark was asked if he believed the stories about the place. About it being a gate. About what lives there. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I don't know what's down in that hole. I don't know what made that sound. But I know this. That place wanted us to leave. And I am very glad we did." Pull up Google Maps right now. Type in Stull, Kansas. It's a real town. About 20 people live there. There's a small road, a few old houses, and one tiny church at the top of a hill. And for over 100 years, people have said that this small, quiet place is one of the 7 gateways to hell on earth. Tonight, I'm going to tell you what happened to a group of friends who drove out there on a cold October night. And I'm going to tell you what they heard in the dark, something that none of them have ever been able to explain. Stull, Kansas is about 15 miles west of Lawrence. You drive past flat fields, past old farms, past roads that seem to go nowhere. Then you see it, a hill. At the top of that hill, there are the stone walls of a very old church. The church has no roof. The windows are empty. The doors are gone. It burned down many years ago, and what's left just sits there, open to the sky. Right next to it is a small graveyard. Some of the headstones go back to the 1800s. The names on them are worn down now. You can barely read them. People around here don't go up that hill at night. They just don't. A local farmer, when asked about the cemetery, the story started long ago. People said a tree grew in the middle of the graveyard where a man was hanged. They said the tree would never let rain touch the ground under it, even during the heaviest storms. The tree is gone now, but old people in town still remember it. Pope John Paul II was once flying over Kansas on his way to a visit. His plane changed its path so it would not fly over Stull. His team said he did not want to fly over unholy ground. Whether that story is true or not, one thing is sure. Stull Cemetery is a real place, and real things have happened there. This happened in October, about 10 years ago. 5 friends, let's call them Mark, Dana, Jess, Tom, and Ryan, decided to drive out to Stull for Halloween.